In this third video about identifying question type, let's just remind ourselves what we're doing here. If we are able to identify the question type, we can then decide what skill or technique we want to apply. In the first video, we talked about big idea questions. In the second video, we talked about factual and detail questions. In this video, we're going to talk about the thinking questions, the questions that require us to do a little bit of logical reasoning, and they fall into some pretty predictable formats, but there's a couple of curveballs I'll talk about moving forward. So, the most common type of thinking question is going to be what are known as inference questions. Sometimes these are very easy to identify. If you take a look at these three questions right here, notice in each one of them, they literally use the word infer or the word inferences. So, in that case, it's going to be very easy to identify. What exactly is an inference question? Why is it considered a thinking question? The reason why is because the actual answer is not directly stated. A lot of people seem to think that that means it's a guess. No, it doesn't mean it's a guess. You still need to have solid evidence from the passage, but the answer you choose is not going to be literally stated word for word or detail for detail like it is in detail factual questions. You have to kind of go a little bit outside the evidence, but not much, just a little bit outside the evidence. Okay, so obviously in this case, the inference questions would be very easy to identify. Again, all use the word infer. But there are other ways that they can phrase inference questions. Take a look at these three right here. So the first one and the second one use the word suggests. Anytime you see the word suggest, that is an indication that it is going to be an inference question. And if you look at the third one, it uses the word implies. So again, that is also going to be an indication that this is an inference question. In fact, if you are to loan somebody money, that has kind of the same meaning as imply something. And if you were to borrow money, that has the same meaning as infer. So notice they both deal kind of with similar concepts right there. It's just that whenever you imply, you are the thing that is causing the audience to infer something. I know it's a little bit confusing, but the loan borrow thing hopefully helps it out. And then finally, inference questions might not have the word infer or imply or suggest at all. They might be phrased a little bit differently. So take, for example, this one right here. The author of the passage would be most likely to agree that an interpretation of a novel should. How do I know that this is an inference question? It's going to be because of this language right here. Would be most likely to agree. If it was purely a factual and a detail question, it would say the author would agree. They would use a lot stronger language. So whenever they use hedging language like this is called hedging language. That is an indication that you might be looking at an inference question. So those are inference questions, and that's how you identify them. Great. We're now going to talk about sentence function and author's purpose questions. Now, first of all, why are these even thinking questions? Because again, it's not like the author literally says, I'm writing this sentence for this reason. You kind of have to go a little bit outside the passage to figure out exactly what it is, but it's still going to be based on evidence. So keep that in mind. It's still going to be based on evidence. So the easiest way to identify these questions is, of course, they sometimes just use the word function. So as you can see, function right there, that's pretty easy. And if you take a look at the third one down there, it uses the word roles for the two portions right there in boldface. Roles, in this case, is going to be a synonym of the word function. So that's how we identify these. Another easy way to identify these questions is if you take a look at these questions right here. Actually, that is a mistake. What do I want to say here? What I want to say here is that whenever they tell you to select a sentence, in most cases, it's going to be a sentence function. What role is this sentence playing, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at the first one, select the sentence that describes an allegory for Voltaire's acquisition of knowledge concerning Newton's ideas. I would consider this a function question. The reason why is because it uses the phrase allegory. In fact, I don't really need this information at all. Unless the passage is just making a whole bunch of allegories, which I doubt. It's probably just making one. So as long as I can find that allegory or that metaphor, I'm done. So I would consider this primarily a function question. But if you look at the next one here, select the sentence in the passage in which the author introduces a specific blah, blah, blah mode of expression. Notice if I were to cross out everything after introduces, I would have no idea what to look for because, of course, the author is going to introduce several things, more than one. So in this case, because I need this detail and I need this evidence a lot, I would consider this a detail factual question. Of course, the distinction between these two is quite subtle. And if you just want to call both of these factual questions, that's fine. But anyway, that's kind of the distinction that I make. All right, getting back on track, another easy way to identify sentence function author's purpose questions is if you take a look at these three examples, do you see the phrase in order to in each one of them? In order to, of course, means due to or for this reason. So if you see any kind of language referring to why the author does something or for what purpose or something like that, it's pretty strong indication that it's going to be sentence function or author's purpose. And the third type of thinking question is going to be a vocab and context question. So here's two examples. The reason why these are thinking questions is because, unlike the TOEFL, where you could just literally choose an answer right after reading coinages or inflation, you can't do that here. You actually have to use the passage, find the evidence, and then make, based off of that, the best educated guess for the meaning of this word. So, again, kind of a thinking question there. And then the final thing I want you to keep in mind is thinking questions can sometimes come into a form you're not totally used to. The rule is if it requires you to do some kind of logical reasoning or thinking a little bit outside the box, it's going to be an inference question. Here's just one example. Which of the following most logically completes the passage? So clearly, the answer we choose here is not directly stated in the passage because they're asking us to finish it. And notice it requires a little bit of thinking on our part. So I would classify this as an inference question. Again, the lines are a little bit blurry, they're a little bit fuzzy. The easiest way to identify these questions are going to be the words like inference and imply and suggest and in order to and function, and of course the vocab and context questions. But like I said, they might occasionally throw you a curveball here, which requires you to do some thinking without vocab that you're used to. So just, be on your toes a little bit. All right, so in the first video, we talked about the big idea questions. In the second video, factual detail. And in the third video, we talked about the thinking questions. That's pretty much it. Those are going to be the questions you come into on the academic reading passages. And so, yeah, we can go ahead and move on and talk about some other strategies that are useful for the questions and the answer choices.